Right. Welcome everyone to the PJ's Cast. I'm your host Pierce, alongside of my good pals Jacob and Empy. We have a very special guest today here. We have Brock Otten of McKeen's Hockey. How's it going, Brock?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, thanks for coming on. So before we get into any of the questions, how was your vacation that you were on for the past week?
Oh, it was good. I was in Cape Cod with some friends. I've been to Boston many times, but never actually spent time or extended time anyway in the Cape. So, yeah, it was cool. It was good. Weather was good. Beaches were good. Can't complain about that.
Oh, that's good to hear. Were you in Montreal for the draft?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, yeah,
Oh yeah, I was
yeah.
with my other friend too, and I just want to say how was Montreal because I we had a blast there when we
It
were
was great.
like
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I wish the draft could be held in Montreal every year. Although, I mean, Nashville's
oh,
not
it
a
was awesome.
not a
Yeah.
bad place for it next year. But yeah, Montreal is such a great city. So many good things to do, and everything is so accessible when the draft is held at the Bell Center. There, it's just so easy. So yeah, it was a great time. Great draft too. I mean, it was great to have everything sort of back to normal in terms of coverage. So yeah.
Were there some places you tried for foods? There was one place that we went to. I don't know if you went to. It's called Dunn's. It was a poutine place. I think I had a poutine and like a Montreal smoked steak sandwich. It was so good.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I've been to Dunn's before, but
oh yeah,
not this trip. This time, I didn't go out to dinner all that much. We went to one place that's one of my favorites there. It's Crescent Burger Bar. That's a good one. Otherwise, kind of just ate what they gave us for the media portion. I mean, free food is sometimes good too.
yeah.
Although I did get tired of the Bell Center hot dogs by the end of the trip. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, definitely. I would like to go back to Montreal, just like even if there isn't a draft there, just as like a regular trip. So yeah, I was glad to hear that you enjoyed Montreal because I went with my other podcast host who couldn't make it today, but we had a blast there. Um, so now that we're kind of done asking those questions, we're gonna get into the serious questions, I guess. Kind of on that topic still, the 2022 draft. I wonder what you thought were some of the big winners of that day.
Well, the one that really,
I guess both days because
yeah, yeah. No, I know what you meant. I think the big one that really jumps out is Seattle. I really like what they were able to do. I mean, they had quite a few picks, and uh, it feels like they were really able to bring in a lot of talent to help their system out. I think they had a pretty good first year for their draft, but this year I think they definitely stole the show, and they were able to get right at 4, which I think is a great fit for them. They're set down the middle with Veneers and right, hopefully anyway, for the next little bit, and they can focus on building out the rest of that roster moving forward. And I think they did a really good job. Obviously, maybe there's a little bias there because Ontario is the region that I do primarily cover, and they did poach the OHL quite a bit.
yeah,
But I just really liked what they were able to do with so many picks. I think Montreal is another obvious winner. Obviously, with the draft being held in Montreal, you knew they were going to do something, and getting Slaff is great, obviously for them. And I think they made some really good picks in some of the later rounds as well, and obviously we're active on the trade front. So I think they had a strong draft, and I think those are the two that really stood out for me.
okay. And conversely, like what did you think were kind of some of the losers, or at least could have done better with their drafts?
That's such a loaded question. It's a tough one, right? Because you could say right now that you didn't really like some of the picks that a team made, and in 2 years' time, that might not be the case, right? Kind of look at how everybody crapped on the Ottawa Senators draft last year, right? Because of the Boucher selection, and then some of the other players that they took, and the second and earlier rounds. And now some of those picks are looking a little bit better. Zach Ostapchuk just made Team Canada, so some of those picks are starting to look a little bit better. I think the one team that I think maybe could have done better is Arizona. They had so many picks, and they ended up, making some trades that I think were kind of questionable in terms of what they got for the opportunity to sort of move up, and then the players that they took with some of those selections to move up. I think it was a very, very risky draft for them. I think other than Cooley, I think they really sort of swung for the fences on a lot of their picks. And in a few years, I mean, that draft had the opportunity to really change the fortunes of that franchise, right? With so many picks in the top 50, if they had hit on half of those, right, I think it really would have turned that franchise around. And I think that the sort of consensus on the floor too at the draft was a little bit of disappointment on how they sort of approach those picks, but ultimately we'll find out in 5 years or so. But if I had to pick a team that I was kind of underwhelmed with, it would probably be Arizona, based on just how many selections they had at their disposal.
Yeah, I kind of framed it the wrong way. I think the better way would have been asked like what was kind of underwhelming, because again, you can't say, oh, that's a bad draft. These are all young kids and like things can change in the next few years. But like at the same time, like if a team goes off the board a couple of times, especially in the first round, you're kind of like, maybe they could have gone for this guy or whatever. But again, that's the whole point of the draft. You draft like you're never going to be able to tell right off the bat. Like sometimes you don't know for 5 or even maybe even 10 years if you got the right players. So
yeah, and it's very subjective too, right? Like I might say that I didn't like Arizona's draft, but if you had a couple other people on, they might say the opposite and say that they really liked what Arizona did, right? By adding Cooley and taking a chance on a guy like Julian Lutz and taking a chance on Duda and some of the other guys that they brought in. So it's very subjective, especially this early. So it's a tougher question.
Course.
All right, I'll give the floor to one of you guys. I've been doing all the talking. So.
This is kind of in the same vein, but a little different. Was there a pick specifically in the first round that kind of like surprised you, where that guy fell that much, or that guy went that high?
Yeah, that's a good question. Being on the floor, it was kind of a very interesting perspective, because a lot of the stuff is being chatted about. So a guy like Reed Schaefer, for example, right?
Yeah.
That one might have been shocking if that wasn't sort of the buzz around Montreal on the weekend, that there were teams that had him sort of ranked in that first round range. So when he did go, it was kind of like, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, it kind of makes sense, right? Same with Brad Lambert falling. That was another one that was sort of widely debated in Montreal over that weekend. And to see him fall the way to Winnipeg at the end of the first round there wasn't ultimately that shocking. I do think the Shane Wright going at 4 was sort of the big one. I think that even right up to when Montreal selected, I don't think any of us really knew what they were going to do. And that's kind of rare. Sometimes that sort of stuff does tend to leak out, and we were all sort of like, what's going to happen? Like they were pretty tight-lipped about it. The one thing that we did sort of have an idea of from talking to people is that Arizona and New Jersey were not extremely high on Shane Wright. So that there was that chance that if Montreal didn't take him, then maybe he was there for Seattle. But, how it all ultimately played out, was kind of shocking, especially given, where we've been with Wright for the last 3 or 4 years. I don't want to use the word fall from grace, but, he has been a very hyped player for a long time. And anytime that sort of thing happens, I remember when Jay Bouwmeester fell back in the day. I forget what draft was that, 2003 maybe, or 02.
I think it's 02.
Yeah, that's a while back.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. But I mean, the same sort of thing happened there, and ultimately it worked out pretty well for Jay Bouwmeester, and I think it will for Shane Wright. I'm sure he's probably disappointed, but I do think that that's a really, really, really good spot for him to start his career. Yeah, I would say that the right one is probably the biggest one that stands out.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, like you said, maybe fall from grace isn't the best kind of term, but he was the most hyped guy for almost 2 years going into this draft, and to see him go to 4th is kind of crazy. And I agree with you on the Schaefer pick. I know when that happened, Twitter kind of exploded because everyone was like, Edmonton, this is your chance. And then they took him, and everyone was going, what are you doing? But yeah, the only other one to me was, again, you were on the floor, so maybe it's a bit different, but a lot of people had Kamel going a lot higher than to Nashville.
Yeah, he was definitely one that fell a little bit. Same with Yuri Kulich. Those two kind of fell maybe a little bit lower than the consensus rankings had them. And it was kind of a situation where we're all sort of standing there being like, okay, when's it going to be Kimmel? When's it going to be Yuri Kulich? And yeah, I think that there's some logical reasons why that those happened. I think with Kemmel, I think the big thing is, is he going to be able to sort of get inside at the NHL level? I think the same would be said about Yuri Kulich. I think that Nashville made a great pick with Kemmel. I do like him, and I think the Sabres made a great pick with Kulich as well. I think both those guys will end up working out really well for those organizations. But those were two other guys that sort of fell a little bit lower than we had them at McKeen's, and a lot of people had them in terms of a consensus as well.
No, that's fair. Yeah, that was the only real question I had regarding this draft. MP, did you have anything you wanted to ask?
No, I didn't have anything ready quite yet. I'm still.
That's
all
fair.
Good. Do you think the height?
Yeah.
Do you think the height thing with Joakim Kamel had to do anything with this draft? Because I remember there was like a thing where it's like, oh, he's like 5'11", then he got measured and he was like 5'9" and like 3/4. Do you think that had anything to play with him potentially dropping?
I think unquestionably it did. Yeah, I really do. And that's not like a deceitful thing. It's not in that front. It's just the way that Kemmel plays. I think that when you've got a difference of a couple inches there, obviously he could still hit a bit of a growth spurt, but I do think it definitely probably played into the minds of some of the NHL scouting organizations there, and help them sort of make up their mind on whether they were going to select him or not, or use that high of a selection on him when some of the other guys were available that they really liked or maybe equally liked. Like I said, with Kemmel, obviously the shot is his best skill, right? There's room for improvement in some other areas. And I do think that there is some concern, even before when he was measured in that sort of just under 6 foot range, as to whether he'd be able to get into the middle of the ice of the NHL level. And you make him even smaller, and I think those concerns become even larger. So I do think that played into it.
Gotcha. So
That's
it's
fair.
kind of to wrap up the 2020 draft, I guess, and then we'll get on to the 2023 draft, because I think that's what everyone's excited for, including us, because I'm a Blackhawks fan, Jacob is a Sabres fan, and then MP is a Coyotes fan. I feel like me and MP, in particular, are going to be watching for this upcoming draft, because our teams are not going to be very well. Buffalo might take a bit of a step, but there's also a good chance where they don't make the playoffs and are getting another
Probably still pick top 10,
pick.
yeah.
So,
So what you're saying is that MP watches every draft with a lot of authority.
Oh man!
I love him.
A lot of intrigue.
Yeah, but all of our teams had 3 first-round picks this year, so I just wanted to think what you thought about the Blackhawks first round, because obviously you can bring the trades into it, but I feel like just from a pure draft standpoint, I wonder how you think they did with their first day and their second day as well, and kind of same thing with the Sabres. I feel like we kind of already touched on the Coyotes, but yeah, I just kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I do like what the Hawks did. I think I was a little bit surprised with the direction that they went. I don't think I really expected them to go after Krasinski.
I don't either.
I thought that was a bit shocking, but I do think it's a good pick. I think that when we're looking at upside on the blue line, he was one of the higher upside guys. I think that there is some inherent risk with him as to how good of a defender he's actually going to be. But when you look at some of the other players that they have in their pipeline, you've got Del Mastro, you've got Regula, you've got Alex Vlasic, right? You've got a lot of guys that have that sort of big size profile, probably project more as I wouldn't say the word defensive specialist, because obviously those guys do have some offensive skill as well. But I think adding somebody like Korchinski into the organization ultimately did make some sense. And I mean, also with Nazar, I'm a big fan. I think that he has a lot of potential as well. And I think that just like Korchinski, that's it's a swing for the fences, right? Another guy that has among the highest offensive ceiling of any player, I would say, available in 2022. Again, I think that there is some sort of inherent risk there. I think that there is a chance that maybe his game doesn't translate quite as well. I mean, is he going to be a winger? Is he going to be a center? What's his game going to look like at the NHL level? And then Sam Renzel we were big fans of his at McKeen's. I think there's another guy with massive upside, but is going to be somebody who's going to be a bit more of a long-term play, obviously coming out of high school. So he's going to take a while, but I do think that there's upside there. I think they did a great job. Lewinsky is another guy that stands out from the OHL. He was one of my personal favorites from the OHL for this draft crop. I think even if his offensive game doesn't really develop, I think you've got a possible sort of third line player, that could have an impact. And I think they've set themselves up really well for that nice little rebuild that they're going to be taking or entering into this year. Because obviously with the moves that they've made, the plan is to not be very good this year. And I think we start the Bedard sweepstakes. But even if they don't end up with Bedard, I think that this draft was a good start in getting him in the right direction.
Oh yeah, and kind of transition in that 2023 draft class, and like obviously the main prize is Connor Bedard, and really watching like the draft lottery that day when they pulled it and to see who gets number one, that's going to be like so crazy. It's going to be great to see everyone's reactions on Twitter on how that goes down. But I feel even if you drop like out of the top three, because I feel the consensus top three is Bedard, Michkov, and Fantilli, there's still some great players at the top of the class that could potentially emerge and even be better than we thought. So what are some of the players that you think could gun for the top five? Because again, I think the top three is picking up, but like I feel like the fourth and the fifth spots are up for grabs, and there's a lot of talented players that could really step up this year and make a name for themselves.
Yeah, I mean the West looks incredible. When I say the West, I'm talking about the WHL.
WHL,
such a good crop for them. They're going to have some players that push into that sort of top 7-8 range if they're not there already. Braden Yeager is one that really stands out. I thought he had a pretty good Ivan Holinka or Holinka Gretzky, whatever you want to call it, for Canada. And he's the type of player that projects really well as a pro, I think, because he's got a really well-rounded game, skates well, shoots well. I mean, I think there is a little bit of room for him to improve as a decision maker with the puck. I think that his awareness off the puck is a lot better than with it at times. But that's nitpicking, and I think he's going to have a big year. And I think that he's somebody who's going to push up there. And I think there's a bunch of guys from the Dub, but you've obviously got Riley Heidt as well. He's somebody that is that same sort of type of player, competitive center that doesn't really have a significant weakness. I think there's ultimately going to be a defender that pushes their way up into that like sort of top 7-8 mix. If I was a betting man, it would probably be Cam Allen. Obviously, maybe I'm a bit biased there, being from, again, the OHL region, but I think he's one of the better young defenders that we've had from the league in some years. And I think he definitely projects as a top pairing guy. And I think if he has the kind of year that I expect him to, I think he's going to push his way up there, because that somebody is going to want to grab a defender, especially with Cam Allen being a right shot guy. So if he plays well and the projection sort of sticks with him being that top pairing guy, a top pairing right shot defender, it's going to look mighty enticing to some of those teams sort of picking in that top range. Obviously, the Mishkov thing is going to be really interesting to see how that sort of unfolds with everything that's happening in Russia and what his contract situation looks like. And teams are going to probably have to wait for him, the way that Minnesota did for Kaprizov. But obviously, it was worth the wait with him being such a good young player in the NHL. And but when you're picking in that top 5 range, is a team going to want a more immediate impact player, especially in a really, really, really strong draft year? I mean, you look at drafts a year out, right? And there's usually quite a few players that stand out. But this year, it's just the depth is really, really good. And that's without, the players that are going to jump up with strong seasons, who are going to come out of nowhere, for lack of a better term. So I'm really excited about this crop in general, especially from the WHL, like I said.
I feel like even with just Bedard from the WHL, that would be like a banner year for them. But they have like several guys that could potentially
Mhm.
push for the top 10 and like top 5 even, and like a lot of other guys that could work their way into the first round. Like it's pretty crazy. Um, Again, I want to give the floor to one of you guys, Jacob or MP. Do you guys have any questions?
Um, I was gonna talk about the WHL, but you already went over that. Yeah, Braden Yeager, Zach Benson looked great. Um, hypothetically, let's say Mitch Cobb was to drop. Do you think like what's the lowest he could fall to?
I
In
think it
your
really,
opinion?
yeah. You know what? That's kind of hard to say right now, just because it really
Mhm.
depends on the kind of year that he has, right?
Fair,
Um,
yeah.
Obviously, I think most of us are anticipating he's going to have a really good year in the
Mhm.
KHL, and but who knows? I know that there
Yeah.
are some people out there who are concerned about, kind of like what we just talked about with some of the other guys that fell this year, right? There is some concern about his ability to sort of make his way and play through the middle of the ice, and that's going to be something he's going to have to do at the KHL level, playing against men, and
Yeah.
if that becomes something that scouts are slightly concerned about, that might cause him to fall more when you add in the whole, Russian factor,
Yeah.
his contract factor, the lure of the KHL, how long teams are going to have to wait for him. If he plays really well, and we're still talking about him as a top prospect, I don't see him falling out of the, say, like top 5 or 6. I just don't.
Okay.
If he plays well, somebody in that top 5 or 6 is going to say, "Hey, look, like we're just going to take him, and when he comes, and um, it'll probably be a team that is probably at the start of their rebuild because they don't care. They're not going to
Blackhawks.
be, yeah, like Chicago, right? Like
Mhm.
somebody who is saying, we're in year 1 or 2 of a 5-year rebuild. So if he shows up
Mhm.
in year 5, it's going to be perfect
Yeah.
timing for us, right?
Mhm.
Whereas if it's teams that are wanting to get out of the rebuild stage, let's say another team like New Jersey, right? I don't think New
Mhm.
Jersey wanted to draft second this year. They're a team that wants to get out of that rebuild phase. They want to take that next step forward, right?
Yeah.
And if New Jersey is in the bottom 5 again next year, and there are some of these concerns with his contract, that might be a situation where they say, like, we want somebody that's going to help us in 2 years, not 5, because
Mhm.
that just fits our sort of timeline for the rebuild that we've started and want to finish, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, but again, I just don't see it. If he's as talented as he's shown so far, somebody will take him regardless of what the situations are.
No, that's totally fair. He also picked up a knee injury, right? He's going to be out for 2 months, or I guess it's like a month now because it was a little bit ago.
Yeah,
But
it's kind of sketchy. Originally, it looked not great, and then they were saying 2 months,
Mhm.
and then it was like, okay, now it's going to be maybe a couple weeks, and it's just like, who? I mean, who knows, right?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
that's something that could linger, depending
Mhm.
on the severity of it. So that's something to monitor for sure. But it does look like, or sound like, he's sort of avoided any sort of serious injury, which is obviously great, because that would have been
Yeah,
pretty
of course.
devastating if he had,
Mhm.
suffered a torn ACL or something in the preseason there and then been done for the year. That would have thrown
Mhm.
quite the wrinkle into the 2023 draft.
Absolutely.
MP,
MP,
I
do you
want to
have
give you the
anything
floor.
else?
Yeah.
No, I
I
do
just
have something ready for this one. With I guess such great skater depth. When do you think a team is going to take a goalie, or how early?
Yeah, so right now it looks like Scott Ratzlaff is probably the top goalie for this class. I know there's a few
Mhm.
others that have shown reasonably well, but I think based on what he showed at the Holinka,
Mhm.
and even going into the Holinka, he was considered one of the top ones. I would say he's probably the top of the class right now. With how deep and strong this draft is, I wouldn't say a goalie cracks the first round. I think
Mhm.
I think that it's definitely looking like a better group than this past year's, which I would say is probably the worst group of goaltending prospects I've ever seen for a draft. So 2023 is already looking better.
Mhm.
That said, I would be shocked if a goalie cracked the first. Even Ratzlaff, you're looking at a guy who, we're not talking about a 6'5", 200-pound athlete. Ratzlaff is just over sort of that, like, reasonable cutoff that scouts seem to have made up. where they start to ignore goaltending prospects, right? So he's just over that cusp. But I think that he's probably number one right now.
So Brock's power just went out. We'll try to wrap.
This is like the second time this. I think I was on with like the hockey writers guys or something when this exact same thing happened. It was like during a storm because it's storming here now. So the storm must have knocked out the power. I guess it happened when I was on with the hockey writers too. And then just as I got back on, two of those guys lost their power. So it's just like I don't have good luck with the power outages in these podcasts. Sorry, guys.
Okay. Well, it's okay. We'll wrap it up as quickly as we can here. So, what are some? I feel like every year, if you like pay attention to the draft, like I feel everyone has like their kind of favorite players. Like this past year for me, I really like Jagger Firkus, Lane Hudson, and Philip Machar, and I feel like I gravitate to more of these like smaller skilled players. And I'm just wondering for this class, like what are some of the players that you really like? I guess like are gravitating towards who like / want to succeed or whatever.
Yeah, so the first one I already mentioned would be Cam Allen. I said, I really liked what I saw from him in his 16-year-old season with Guelph. Thought he was one of the better 16-year-old defenders that's played in the league in some time.
He's gone.
Yeah, I wonder if he just lost too.
Oh man.
Anyway, so Cam Allen for sure is one that stands out. I thought he had a really good Holinka for Canada as the captain. I don't think he was amazing at the event, but I think he was solid, and I think he's going to have a really good year for Guelph. And I think that right now he's my favorite defender in the class. So definitely he's the first one that sort of stands out for that. Jacob mentioned Zach Benson. He's somebody that I really liked watching Winnipeg last year. I thought that he was better than Savoy and better than Geeky on a lot of nights that I watched Winnipeg. And I thought he was great at the Holinka, and I thought he was great at the camp, and pretty much been great anytime I've ever watched him. And I think that he's somebody I could see sort of becoming my favorite of this class. I just think that he thinks the game at such a high level. You can just tell that he's just one step ahead of everybody else out there. And I think he's going to have a really, really big year in the WHL. And I think he's going to sort of push himself up into that top 5 range. Those are the first two that stick out for me as early sort of favorites. From the OHL, one name that I'll throw out at you is Bo Akey. He was probably, I think he was going to be on the Holinka team, but then he suffered an injury at the very beginning of camp and wasn't able to participate. So obviously wasn't able to make the team. But I think he's somebody that could have a really big year in Barrie. Really mobile defender, sort of that modern pro style. I think he can be an impact player at both ends. And I think that he's somebody that, is going to do really well behind Brant Clark if he's back in Barrie this year. And I think he's somebody who's going to push his way sort of up the draft list from the OHL.
Okay. I had one question about an OHL player. I've heard his name. I think a lot of people are just gravitating towards him because of the funny last name. What do you think about Quentin Musty?
Yeah, so Musty is a guy that's going to frustrate scouts this year a lot. There's a really high skill level. That package of size and skill is going to be very, very enticing. I think that there's a lot of concerns about, his ability to process the game. His ability to engage physically consistently. I think that there's room for improvement as a skater. So there's a really high upside, but then there's a lot of things that I think scouts are going to be really looking for him to improve this year with Sudbury. And I say frustrating because, he's the type of guy that, makes or has like one really, really good shift where he makes a couple great reads and makes a couple of really good passes. And then the next shift, commits a really bad offensive zone turnover just because he fails to identify, a defender stepping into the lane or something happening. So it's just going to be really interesting to see how his game develops this year. If he plays really well, he's going to go high because, he has that sort of rare blend of size and skill that I mentioned earlier. If he struggles, I think back to somebody like Brandon Saad in his draft year and how he sort of came into the year with a lot of hype and came in as a potential sort of top 10 selection, didn't have a great year for some of the same reasons that I just mentioned about Quentin Musty. Obviously, Saad's had a good NHL career, not a great one, but he's become a very stable NHL player. So yeah, Quentin Musty is definitely going to be one to watch this year from the OHL.
Okay, awesome.
MP, do you have any last questions?
No, I had my one that I had in mind. That was about
I
all got.
have one more quick one before you go. You mentioned briefly about the last year's goalie drafts. As a Sabres fan, I didn't know much about him when he was drafted. What are your thoughts on
Topias
Topias?
Leinonen.
Thank you. The first goalie to go. I thought they should have went different, but I need some sort of scout on him.
Yeah, so we weren't the biggest fans of his at McKeen's, but we didn't really have any goalies ranked highly. Leinonen was our highest ranked goalie, but not until the end of the sort of third round range. Talking with a lot of people leading up to the draft, that was sort of like one of the big questions that everybody was talking about. It's like, when's the first goalie going to go? When's the first goalie going to go? And I actually had a conversation with NHL Network about this. They were sort of polling a whole bunch of people saying, trying to get a consensus. And the consensus was most people thought it was going to be sort of in that mid third round range. Ultimately, the Sabres ended up taking Leinonen a lot higher, probably because they liked him, probably because they didn't think that there was another goalie worth drafting in this class, and probably because they thought that there were some teams in that range that were going to take him if they didn't, right? So it becomes a situation where this is a player that you like and believe in. You got to jump on them early, especially in a weaker goaltending year. If you think this is the only goalie that maybe has the potential to be a starter. With Leinonen, the big thing is that sort of size and how the athleticism sort of grows into his body. I think that there is some room for improvement with his agility and his lateral quickness. I think that he's already, a pretty solid tracker of the play. I think he's fairly technically sound. It's just finding a way to sort of improve his overall athleticism so that he can be a little bit more aggressive in the crease and be a little bit more consistent. So he'll be an interesting one to watch in Finland. I wonder, if at some point they try to figure out a spot for him to play if he's not getting the time in Finland. Maybe that is an import selection. The Finnish goalies have been coming over to, the OHL, to the CHL, to the USHL, to college in recent years. So that maybe that's a route that they look at for him if he's not getting the sort of development that they like in Finland.
All right, to hammer your point home, the next goalie went 20 picks, and then there wasn't another one until 102. So they must have seen something they liked, and then no one saw anything else for a little bit. But
the thing with Buffalo too is that they've got such a good crop of goaltending prospects already, right? So it can be a situation where this was a player that they thought had the best potential in that spot, and with Devin Levi and Eric Portillo already sort of in their system, gives them an opportunity to sort of take a chance on somebody like Island.
No, that makes sense. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
So my last question to kind of close things off, where do you think this draft, again, it's kind of a subjective question, like where do you think this draft ranks up to past drafts? I feel like the gold standard for NHL drafts is the 2003 one, but maybe in terms of like the past 10 years or whatever, like where do you think does it rank highly or more lowly, or like, and the kind of the same thing, like what, like Connor Bedard, where does he match up to like Connor McDavid and like Austin Matthews?
Yeah, 2003 is the gold standard, right? We're going to obviously compare any sort of draft that we think is a good one to that. And I think it right now it looks like it could hold up. This draft looks like the best one in years. And it starts at the very top. Like you said, we've got Bedard, who I do think is a generational talent. I know we said that about Shane Wright for many years, and that didn't, jury's still out, but he's looking more likely to be sort of a solid long-term NHLer and not somebody we would consider in that sort of McDavid, Austin Matthews, Sidney Crosby level. But I do think Bedard can be in that level. I think that he's going to be one of the better players in the NHL for many years. And it all starts with him. I think it just depends on the number of sort of high-end guys that develop around Bedard for this draft, right? Because not only are you looking at a draft and judging its strength based on its depth, but you're also looking at high-end talent, right? So if Adam Fantilli has a fantastic year at Michigan, if Mishkov plays really well in the KHL, if Zach Benson, is one of the scoring leaders in the WHL, if Braden Yeager is right up there as well, if some of these guys really elevate their play and make themselves known to be potential NHL superstars, you're looking at definitely a draft that can hold up to 2003.
Yeah. So that's it. Unless you guys have anything else to add.
No, I got all my questions out. I'm looking forward to the 2023 draft, and yeah, I think the OHL is going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, I'm really looking for, honestly, I'm probably going to be paying attention more to prospects this year than my actual hockey team. So I'm actually really looking forward for this draft. And again, like the Blackhawks sold off their players, but if there's going to be a year to do it, it's definitely this one. I'm really looking forward to see how this unfolds, and maybe we can have you on to talk about it again, because I think even like within the next like few months or so, like once it's November, December, we're going to see a lot of change. So
yeah,
thank you, Brock.
Absolutely. I would love to. Yeah, might be my pleasure.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks Brock for coming on. Whenever we have like prospect people on, like we've had on Will Scout before, Chris Peters, Scott Wheeler as well. I'll say this, they know their shit. So we always love having them on, having you guys on. So again, I appreciate you coming on, even with your power going out.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know.
Don't even worry about it.
Yeah, not great. Anyway,
hopefully it gets back up soon. And yeah, thanks for coming on, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you. You too.
Of course. Take care, man.